What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2015 BMW X1 E84. Today on the X1 behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace your rear brakes. This is going to be applicable to all your E84 models with a manual parking brake, not an electronic one, as well as your E9X vehicles. In front of us, we have a Zimmermann pair of rotors with an Akebono brake pad set, along with a BOA wear sensor and a new set screw. These are going to last you anywhere from 40 to 60,000 miles, depending on the kind of driving that you do. The vehicle behind us has about 80,000 miles, so we're just going to go ahead and do these as preventative maintenance as we are doing the fronts as well. A couple of things to note is as your vehicle goes through the brakes, if you trigger the brake pad sensor, you will get a warning light on the dash. That's an easy indicator to tell you that your brakes are worn. However, you want to make sure you either need the fronts or the rears. For that, you will want to do a visual inspection, see what the life on the pads look like, see what the surface of the rotors look like. Anything less than 2 millimeters left on your pads, you're going to want to go ahead and replace them. There are plastic gauge tools out there that you can use to measure that. If the rotors start to develop a bit of a lip on the outboard or inboard side of them, just run your fingernail across the front to check. More than likely, you're going to want to replace those as well. And should you get any shuddering under heavy braking, that could be a telltale indicator that your rotors are warped. However, don't rule out worn out suspension. Before we get started on this DIY though, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this job, you will need a couple torque wrenches and ratchets depending on what tools you have to work with. You want a torque wrench that can handle anywhere from 16 Newton meters all the way to 120 Newton meters. We have both 3/8 drive and 1/2 inch drive for both of those today. Paired with those, we're going to be using a 17 millimeter lug bolt. We have a 16 millimeter socket for both size wrenches. We have a 8 millimeter socket, a 7 millimeter hex, and a 6 millimeter hex. In addition to that, we have a small flathead screwdriver. We're using CTA 1465. It's a single piston compressing tool to compress our pistons back into our calipers. A small wire brush, a drill attachment will work nicely as well, or some emery cloth. A caliper hanger tool. If you do not have one of those, a bungee cord will do, or zip ties. Usually on the rear brakes on these models, you have enough swing to just kind of get them over the hub. You may not even need the tool at all. A hammer in case your rotor is seized onto the hub. Some brake clean is always nice to have, and an impact tool to get the lug bolts off quicker. Now we know what tools we're working with. Let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, before we begin, we want to acknowledge where the brake master cylinder reservoir is on our X1. So this vehicle is going to be located on the driver's side underneath this cover. It's got two small tabs, one on the front, one on the back, that hold it in place with a little rubber grommet. Once you remove that, you have access to the reservoir here. You can check how much fluid is in it. If you feel that you may overfill the system, compressing the pistons back in, you can always pull a little bit out before you start your brake job. In this case, we're actually going to be doing a DIY on this vehicle, explaining how to use a motive bleeder. So we are going to be revisiting this again. So I'm not too worried about what the fluid in there looks like right now, but it's a good point to also check it, inspect it. If the fluid's getting a little bit darker, you want to consider doing a flush. But with that, now we can go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, for today, we're going to be focusing on the rear passenger side of the X1, as this is the side equipped with the brake pad wear sensor. These steps are going to be identical for the driver's side with the exception of the sensor. We're going to be working on the lift today. However, this is a super garage-friendly, driveway-friendly DIY. To get started, we're going to work on removing the 5 17 millimeter lug bolts that hold our wheel onto the vehicle. If you do not have an impact gun like we will be using today, I recommend that you break all the lug bolts free first before you raise it up. That way you're not putting any weird strain on the wheel or fighting the wheel from spinning. And then you can lift it up and remove your lug bolts. So let's get these off and go from there. All right, my good people, now with the wheel off, we have a better view of where we're working. First things first is we're going to make sure that this rotor set screw can come free. If we can't get that off and we take everything else off, then this job is going to be pointless. So 6 millimeter hex to break the rotor set screw free. If you have any penetrating fluid, now would be the time to use it. Let it soak for a little bit. These brakes are not terribly old as far as mileage goes. As you can see, they don't look awful. So I think these should come out no problem. And yeah, we were able to break that free. We're going to let that hang in there for now. Next, we're going to work on removing the anti-rattle clip. We're going to use a small flathead screwdriver for that. The goal here is to pry from the center of the clip, like so. You might even just be able to do it by hand, and then pull the clip out. But if you're using a tool, it's going to look something like that. Just brace it with your other finger. They do like to fling out. Next on our laundry list is we're just going to go ahead and tackle the brake pad wear sensor now so that we have it ready to go when we reinstall everything. These get routed up along the upper control arm. They swing over by the subframe, and then they get tucked behind the wheel liner here. So we're going to grab our 8mm socket first and work on removing these 3 lower 8mm bolts so we can access the little junction box where the end of our cable is located. If you're watching this through the first time before starting the job, throw a 10mm socket into your tool list as well. I think removing this 10mm plastic nut will give us a lot better access to the junction box that holds our cable in place. So 8mm socket on our ratchet. Let's go ahead and work these 3 8mm bolts off. And we'll swap over to the 10. This is more insurance, but I'll probably make our lives easier. Get this 10mm plastic nut off by the shock body. And now we're going to fold the fender liner over. Just be mindful, there's going to be a lot of dust and debris in here. You don't want to have that fall on your face or where you're breathing. All right, and with this folded over, we can see a better view of the junction box that holds our clips in place. We're going to want to disconnect the white one. And while we're looking at it here, you can see they have a small locking tab on them at the top. You're just going to press that in, pull the other end, and disconnect. And now we can pull the cable down. And there's a bunch of white clips holding this all along the way to the caliper on the subframe and on the upper control arm. Usually these need to be pried open with like a small flathead screwdriver. You can see these are not really clipped in really well doing anything. These brakes were done not too long ago, so we're going to assume that they just came undone over time. But we have a secondary clip right behind the spring. Same thing, these hold the ABS cable and brake line cable in place. Just not really doing much right now. If you come over my right shoulder here, you can see we have 2 more on the upper control arm. Small flathead screwdriver. Pry the top, pop it open. That's going to be the process on all of them pretty much. And then these are usually routed behind the dust cap for the brake bleeder valve. Pop that open. And lastly, we're just going to pull it out of the brake pad. It's always sitting on the inboard pad. So when you go to install your new one, just note that it's going to go on the inboard pad. And it really only goes on one way. So you can just pop that one out. And you can note the meaty portion of the sensor goes towards the pad. The flat side goes towards the piston. So while I have you here, let's just route our new one in right away. And we'll just work our way backwards. We're not going to clip it onto the brake pad, of course, as we're going to be replacing them. Just going to let that hang there. Feed it around the back of our spring here. I'm going to start by plugging it in first. These are keyed, so they truly only go on one way. As you can see, it almost looks like a little mouth. You got 2 eyes and a smiley face. They're keyed, they only go on one way, so we'll be sure to plug it in. There we go, that's that clip we wanted. Clip it back into our junction box up here. Slide it in there. And these cables usually have little spots in between the rubber sheathing that kind of allow for them to live in certain clips. So this one lines up nicely here. We'll use that gap there. And we're just going to do the same thing the rest of the way around. This one we're going to fix. We're going to make sure our ABS cable goes back in here. And then our brake pad wear sensor cable. This one is in such a tedious spot behind the spring here. If you need to, you can throw a zip tie on your clips if they're a little bit worse for wear as insurance. Now we can head over to the upper control arm. Same thing, there's a little channel there in the sheathing. Nice. And now with that clipped in here, we're going to go ahead and just tuck this cable out to the back we'll wait to install it once our new brake pads and rotors are in. But for now, we can head back to the wheel liner and reinstall our 10mm plastic nut. So we don't have to worry about that later. And we'll take our 3 8mm bolts and get those on there as well. We're just going to snug these 8mm bolts down. They're just going into thin metal body clips, so they don't need to be extremely tight. Once they are snug, they're good. Now with that situated, we can hop behind the brake caliper and work on removing our guide pins. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the 2 dust caps on the back to access our 7mm guide pin bolts. So for that, we're going to hop over to our 7mm hex on our ratchet and get those off. A flex head ratchet here is the move, just because it's a bit tight to work in. You can also use a stubby 7mm hex to do this job as well, which works great. However, you can squeeze a normal size in here with a normal 3/8 drive ratchet. The lower one's the one that gets a little bit tight, just because you have the lower control arm kind of in your way. And I'm just going to push it out from up top here with the flathead screwdriver. Now we'll go ahead and do the bottom one as well. This is the one that gets a little bit snug, but you can get to it. All right, now that we have both guide pins out, we can pull this caliper off. Just be mindful, oftentimes the front pad may want to fall out as they're just kind of held in place here. In this case, we're going to keep the inboard pad in here for a moment. You already know the drill, my good people. We're going to use it as a spacer to help push the piston back into place so that we can load up our new pads in when we're done. Let's get this tool ready. And we're just going to compress this piston in. It should go in very easily. If it ever fights you for any reason, then there's a possible issue with your caliper, or perhaps they collapsed soft line. So just inspect everything, check it. Don't force the piston in. Now that that's bottomed out gently, we can go ahead and back our tool off. Get rid of this old pad. And now is a great time to scrape off any excess debris on the caliper here, any loose rust. Just get it ready for the new stuff. And then with these rear calipers, you have just enough swing in the brake line or the soft line to just let them hang out on top of the upper control arm there. You don't really have to worry about hooking them. If you want to hook them as insurance, you can. But with that, now let's work on getting our caliper carrier off. So that is held in by 2 16mm bolts. So let's get that off. Now with that, we can take the brake caliper carrier off. There's 2 spots that you're going to want to really focus on when you're cleaning these up, and that's going to be these 2 channels on either end where the brake pads ride. So scrape off any gunk and debris, any old paste that's on here. Wire wheel them, wire brush them, whatever you have. We're going to do a little bit of both. Hit them with some brake clean so that they're ready to receive our new pads. Now with that, we can grab our 6mm hex bit and get this set screw off. But before we do that, 2 things, my good people. 1, please, if you haven't already, make sure your parking brake is off. These will not come off if your parking brake is on, all right? The shoes in here expand and they'll sit up against the inside of the disc, keeping you from taking them off. Secondly, we're gonna use a hammer here before we take the set screw all the way off because these are seized onto our hubs. Just gonna give it a light whack from the back. Just enough to break the rust loose. And now we can back up the set screw the rest of the way. We'll pull that off. This is a great time to just brake clean everything in here, inspect the parking brake shoes, which on this car have a lot of life left. So we'll just go ahead and clean everything. While we're at it, we'll also give the hub here a light scrub, get any oxidation off so that we can prep it with our Liqui Moly ceramic paste, which we love using on these brake DIYs. Even though Zimmermann does not require you to use any sort of paste when using their zinc-coated rotors, us living in New England, knowing that we're going to see salt and these things are going to rust, we're still going to go ahead and coat the hub with our favorite paste. We're focusing mainly on the mating surfaces here where the disc sits up against the hub, but we'll give everything a light skim so as it doesn't flash rust too quickly moving forward. Now with that, my good people, we're going to want to grab our new brake disc and set it over. Be mindful of your hands. You don't want to grab them with super filthy hands, as you don't want to hit the brake disc with any brake clean. It will deteriorate the coating on there. So try to keep it as clean as possible. We'll get it situated and we'll get our new set screw started. Brake disc on. If for some reason it did not sit on for you, you can always adjust this wheel here to bring the shoes either in or out if you need to. In this case, I think it's going to go on just fine. I like to use a little bit of paste in the seat where the set screw sits, just to keep it from seizing to the disc itself. Again, this is all overkill insurance, but it does not hurt at all to do this. These 6mm hex get torqued to 16 Newton meters. I'm just going to use the old calibrated wrist today, but you can torque them down properly with the torque wrench. 16 Newton meters. All right. And then back to the overkill portion of this presentation. I like to encapsulate them in this paste. I rather clean this paste off next time I do these brakes, if I do them again, versus drilling that bolt out. My good people, now we're going to reinstall our caliper carrier. Two 16mm bolts. These get torqued down to 65 Newton meters. All right, we'll double check both of these. All right. Now with that situated, we can load our pads in and swing the caliper over. So for these, I always like to lubricate the ears of the pads where they ride on the caliper carrier. You can lubricate the carrier instead if you want, but this way I feel like you lessen the chance of getting paste on the surface of the brake disc. We'll do something like that. We'll do the same thing to our inboard pad. I also like to lubricate the tongues that go into the piston, just to keep them from rusting inside of there if moisture gets in there. I will take our caliper, we'll take our new pad, line that up as best as possible, press it in, and we can slide it over. With that situated now, we can install our guide pins. At this point, my good people, it is totally dealer choice if you wish to lubricate them or not. BMW doesn't require it. I've been doing it. Brake job I do for the most part. I'm just doing a small dash of the liquid moly ceramic paste. Another good rule of thumb is kind of if it already had some on there where you pull them out, then putting them back in with some isn't going to hurt, especially considering the inside of the boot on the caliper is going to be coated in it already, unless you clean them out, of course. All right, now we can switch over to our torque wrench. The bottom one may be a little bit tricky just because of the amount of room we have to work with. So just keep that in mind. 35 Newton meters. There's that one. Oh yeah, baby, no problem. Your dust caps for your boots back on. Now with that, we can work on reinstalling our brake pad wear sensor cable and our anti-rattle clip. So let's do that now. Now we can swing our brake pad wear sensor over once more. And again, like we talked about on the old one, the meaty side with the bump on it, that's where the wear sensor is inside of it. The wear tab, if you will, is going to go towards the pad, and the flat spot is going to go towards the piston. There is one small channel inside of the brake pad here where this sits in, and it goes on one way. There you go. Should feel a nice, satisfying clip. And then there's a small groove here on the cable for it to sit in here with the bleeder valve. Fold that little cover over. All right, and now we can install our anti-rattle clip. And for that, we're going to line up the two tongues, one on either side of the brake caliper carrier, and we'll push here in the center. And there goes our clip. Now we're going to reinstall our wheel. We'll get our lug bolt started by hand. Always start by hand. The last thing you want to do is cross thread a bolt, especially after doing a brake job, and not be able to go take your car for a test drive. I'm going to line those up nicely like so. All right, we're just going to use the impact to snug them up in a crisscross pattern so that we know the wheel is flush to the hub. We're not going to tighten them with this. Now we can lower the car down and give these 17mm lug bolts their final torque. All right, my good people, with the car back on the ground, we're going to stick to the crisscross pattern for tightening down our 17mm lug bolts to 120 Newton meters. Again, that's 120 Newton meters. And with that, my good people, that is going to conclude this DIY for today. Overall, a really straightforward job. If your car does have an electronic parking brake, be sure to check out one of our other BMW videos where we do cover how to use a scanner to retract those parking brakes. If you like this DIY, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.